Hey brewers and beer lovers, welcome to the first episode of Brew Up an Adventure, a podcast and video vlog that is going to be coming out every week, talking about homebrewing, craft beer, and just having fun in life. I focused a lot on my interests, which this being the week before Christmas, there's snow in Idaho, and I have been snowboarding, so we'll probably touch on all of that in today's episode. So first thing, gonna grab a beer to drink. I've done a lot of talking about Idaho IPA from Sawtooth Brewery, where I am working as a production assistant. Some of the stats on the can are 100 IBUs calculated, 6.7% alcohol by volume, and it's becoming one of my favorite beers. When I first tried it, it is aggressively bitter. I mean, it's 100 IBUs, and whether that's lab or calculated, it's still pretty bitter. And like the thing that, like, that bitterness was a little overwhelming the first couple times I tried it. Not overwhelming, but it's aggressive. But then working in the brewery, like, my favorite days were when this is being made, either brewed or when we're packaging. Because there's that bitterness, but especially when it's like not super cold right out of the fridge, like not warm, but just right around 40, maybe a little bit above 40, even up into the 50s Fahrenheit. A lot of tropical fruit notes come out, like subtle, really like, not subtle, I was gonna say subtle mango, but more like ripe mango and ripe pineapple, because it's that sweet tropical fruit flavor and aroma, and it's just really good. But I should shut up about the beer since I've already talked about it quite a bit, and I'm just gonna enjoy it while we chat. So yeah, like, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about recently is people who are just interested in getting started in home brewing, and those of us that have brewed for a long time have a tendency to throw tons of information and details and advice and stuff at somebody that's new. And frankly, I think it scares a lot of people off. And even more than, I mean, that's the worst thing that can happen, but even people who wade through all of the information and advice and details and stuff, I think they sometimes end up being so intimidated that they're like just petrified of the process and worried that they're gonna screw something up and ruin a batch of beer. Which, if that is you and you're new and you're worried about that, let me just say that at some point you will have a batch of beer that won't turn out exactly the way that you planned. I'm not going to say it's a bad beer. I'm not going to say you ruined it, although I am going to talk about a time when I ruined a batch of beer. But more than just being worried about all of that, those things that to some degree will happen at some point in your brewing career, I want to encourage, especially those of you who are just getting started, to do it anyway and to take the risk of it being bad. Because really, in my opinion, the first time that you brew a batch of beer, it's just about surviving the process, because you're going to have all of the advice, everything your brewer friends have told you, everything you've read online, all of, like 80% of which is going to be contradictory. Like all of that's going to be rattling around in your head while you're brewing. And the most important thing is really to get through the brew day, get the wort into your fermenter, get the yeast into the wort in the fermenter, let it ferment, package it, and see what happens. Like, obviously, you know, pay attention to what you can, but really just get through the process, because once you've gotten through the brewing process and you end up with a finished batch of beer that you can drink, it may or may not be great. But once you've made it through the entire process, from your ingredients to finished beer, once you've made it through the process, at least for myself and people I've talked to, mentally I was just able to relax and just do the process. And that relaxation point is the most important thing, because when you're relaxed and you're not frantically worrying about all of the things that might go wrong or all of the contradictory things that people told you or whatever, you can actually pay attention to how your process is working, what you have to do to get through the brew day. And then as you figure those things out, then you can even start to notice things that you want to do different to see if it improves both your process and your beer at the end, or just making a different beer. Because that's really one of the main things for myself about home brewing, is exploring the possibilities. Excuse me. And so really, in my opinion, the most important thing, as I said a little earlier, when you want to get started in home brewing, and really in just about anything, any activity you pick, just get started and be willing to take the risk that it might be bad. And like, the reason that I picked that topic for this first episode is because I have put off doing this for way too long. I built it up in my brain as a big, huge project and a big, huge time commitment and a big, huge potential failure, and everything could go wrong, and I could lose all my friends, and I could like never make beer again and be really sad. And like some of those things might happen, but there's also the potential for me to share my love for brewing and beer and my excitement about it, and hopefully encourage those of you that are interested in getting into brewing or a deeper beer appreciation, which I think both of those things are closely linked together. But I want to be able to share what I know, what I've seen work for other people, and hopefully get lots of people interested in home brewing, as well as encourage my friends who are already brewing to brew even more, and encourage myself to brew even more, because I've been putting off a batch of beer for way too long, and now it's gonna have to wait till after Christmas. But in my brain, I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted to have everything lined up. I wanted to have all of the knowledge that I'm gonna need to edit this video and audio and get it online and all of that. And I built it up into such a large, overwhelming project that I just basically talked myself out of doing it for way too long. But the thought of not doing it makes me even more sad than if the video isn't perfect, or if I do say something that is so blatantly stupid that none of my friends like me anymore, which at some point will probably happen. Well, hopefully not the losing friends part, but I'm gonna say something either stupid or I'm gonna screw up some information, but not so far in this episode. So let's just roll with it. So the big thing, whether we're talking about home brewing or snowboarding or whatever, get started. Be willing to not be great at it. Even maybe be willing to be bad at it, and get started and get better. And that is the main thing that I want to share with you, is just to encourage you to pursue home brewing, make some beer, and don't worry about being perfect, because perfection and the pursuit of perfection, or the idea of perfection, is the best way to not do what you want to do, which is a terrible thing. And I've screwed up and missed out on a lot of stuff because I wanted to do everything perfectly and have everything turn out exactly the way that I wanted it to. And that just generally doesn't happen. So for those of you looking to get into homebrewing, get started. Go do it. For those of you who are happy about the snow like me, get out there and shred. just rip it up. Like, even if it's been a while, try it again. Like, I am so happy that 8 years ago I got my son to try snowboarding and my daughter to try skiing, because it gave me an excuse to start snowboarding again. And I was not great at it when I started snowboarding back in 1989. And I was not great at it when I started again in 2012. But I learned a lot and I progressed, and I have a ton of fun doing it. So if there's anything that you want to try, get out there and try it. You might be bad at it at first. Everybody is bad, or at least not great, the first time they try something. And like, there are exceptions. We're not talking about exceptions, we're talking about real people. And along that line, I will say, my first batch of homebrewed beer turned out amazing. It was so good. It was a Russian Imperial Stout extract kit that I got from the local homebrew shop at the time back in 2007, when I got started. And it was delicious. It was like, I think it came out like 7.5%, 8% alcohol by volume. I fermented it in the garage in January with a heat belt and a sleeping bag, and it turned out awesome. And I got cocky. And my second batch of beer, I invited my brother up to brew with me, and we had it was a late brew day, but it was still pretty good. And I screwed up the fermentation, and it was terrible. Like, I don't want to say it was the worst tasting beer I've ever tasted, but I literally could not drink 12 ounces of it because I accidentally, well, I had a plan, but my plan did not work out, and I wound up fermenting it at about 95 degrees with Safale US-05. And it fermented out in about 24 hours, and I could pour a glass and taste it, and there was definitely an off flavor, but by the time I set the glass down and I picked it back up and took another sip, it felt like somebody was jamming a screwdriver through my temple, and it gave me a splitting headache. And it took me a while to learn that fermenting that hot produced the fusel alcohols, which was what was causing the headache. But my plan was to unplug my refrigerator in the garage, put the beer in there, put a brew belt heater around the brew bucket to keep it warm because it was springtime and I was worried about the cold nights. But really, it got warm in the day, got cold at night, but the refrigerator was pretty insulated, and so the temperature might have gone up and down a little bit, but it would have been fairly, like, would have been fairly stable. It wouldn't have like shot up and then like to 60 degrees, or like it was getting up into the 70s during the day, and then it was frosting at night. And so it wasn't going to go from 80 to 30 to 80 to 30 to 80 to 30. It would have evened out somewhere in the middle, right in that nice cool ale fermentation temperature. But since the fridge was so well insulated, that little brew belt, like when I opened the fridge the next day to check on it, like hot air wafted out of the refrigerator, and it wound up ruining the beer. And it, like, hopefully stuff like that never happens, but most homebrewers have a story of not cleaning well enough, messing something up with their process. It's all part of learning, and even people who've made tons of batches of beer will sometimes screw up a step or an ingredient or something. And as you get more experienced, those mistakes tend to be smaller and have less of an impact on the finished beer. But it still changes the beer from what was intended when it was brewed. So don't be afraid. Get out there and brew up an adventure. Cheers.